The United States-Venezuela conflict now sits inside a wider assertion of US power over the global order, energy markets, oil pricing, dollar dominance, and strategic resources. Venezuela's oil reserves matter at a moment when energy security, rare earth control, and currency alternatives are under pressure. At the same time, Donald Trump has publicly sharpened the tone, making controversial statements about using pressure against other states, openly floating ideas around Greenland and warning rivals that US power will be used to protect its interests. Taken together, this is not just about Caracas. It is a signal to Russia, China, and the global system that Washington still claims the right to enforce the old order. That is why the real question is not what happened, but why January 3rd, why now, and what message this moment was designed to send. Trigger 1. A new strategic mandate. In late 2025, the United States released a new national security strategy. This was not a routine policy update. For the first time, the document formally defined adversarial energy and security footholds in the Western Hemisphere as a direct threat to US national security. In simple terms, the document says this: if rival powers gain control over energy resources or security positions anywhere in the Americas, the US will treat it as a direct danger to its own safety. For the first time, Washington is officially stating that who controls oil, infrastructure, and military access in the Western Hemisphere is not just economic competition, it is a national security red line. That shift matters, because once something is defined as a national security threat, it moves out of diplomacy and into enforcement. January 2026 became the first full operational window after that doctrine moved from paper to practice. Policy turned into action. Trigger 2. The economic collapse window. By December 2025, Venezuela's oil production had collapsed to roughly 500,000 barrels per day, down from over 1 million. This was not just mismanagement. Multiple pressure points converged at once. Loss of diluent supplies needed for heavy crude, shipping and insurance restrictions, intensified maritime enforcement. Policy discussions described the state as approaching uncontrolled collapse, not slow decay, but sudden breakdown. From Washington's perspective, the choice narrowed to two options: intervene before collapse, or absorb the humanitarian, migration, and security fallout after. January became the last controllable window. Trigger 3. The closing geopolitical door. This is the most sensitive and most consequential factor. By late 2025, Caracas was engaged in expanded discussions with Beijing on technical and security cooperation. Permanent foreign technical or intelligence presence along Venezuela's coast would have fundamentally altered the risk equation. Once rival personnel are embedded inside a state's security architecture, extraction operations become exponentially more dangerous. At that point, intervention risks escalation far beyond the region. January 3rd appears to have been chosen before that door closed permanently. What role did oil really play? This operation did not stop at removing a leader. It immediately moved into something more important: resource governance. In modern geopolitics, you do not need to occupy a country to control it. You only need to control what the country lives on. In Venezuela, that is oil revenue. That is why the language shifted from law enforcement to transition management. Because courtroom narratives talk about charges, evidence, and trials. Control narratives talk about systems. Who runs PDVSA? Who controls exports? Who controls money? Who decides what happens next? The United States does not need to own Venezuelan oil fields to dominate outcomes. It only needs to control cash flow. Here's how that works. Oil is sold. Money is collected. Funds move through externally controlled financial structures. Spending is governed by external rules. That is the critical shift. Control over revenue, not territory. Once revenue control is established, a familiar structure appears, what critics call the company store model. Oil proceeds are recycled back into the US economy through forced purchasing loops. Buy American goods, buy American equipments, buy American reconstruction services. Alternative suppliers are blocked. Independent recovery paths are closed. That is why the word colonialism is resurfacing. Not because of flags or governors, but because the national bank account becomes the battlefield. Venezuela is not just an oil prize. It is a strategic resource node. Alongside crude reserves, it sits atop critical minerals that power the next industrial era: lithium, gold, rare earths, cobalt. These materials feed batteries, AI infrastructure, semiconductors, military technology. This is why the operation is bigger than Venezuela. It is a supply chain contest hidden inside a capture story. The great power dimension. China and Russia were not side effects. They were structural targets. China's leverage was economic and long-term. Russia's leverage was security and signaling. Remove the regime and both footholds weaken at once. Add maritime enforcement, shipping routes, insurance access, payment rails, interdiction pressure, and you get occupation without occupation. No troops, no governors, no flags. Power flows through ports, banks, waivers, and choke points. That is the new template. And once a template works, it spreads. Who profits? And how does this affect oil markets? Now, the economics. Venezuela has massive reserves, but production and exports depend on infrastructure, financing, insurance, and market access. If one actor controls export permissions and the revenue pipeline, it gains leverage over supply availability. Supply availability influences pricing dynamics, contract power, regional supply security. This does not mean prices automatically spike. It means influence over flexibility. Who benefits? Not a single villain. Not a cartoon conspiracy, but actors positioned in infrastructure repair, compliance services, shipping and insurance, refining and processing, sanctioned trade management, oil companies, service providers, logistics firms, financial intermediaries. This is not about one company winning. It is about control, favoring those already integrated into the system. Why oil is central? Oil is not a side story. Oil is the transition tool, the leverage mechanism, the bargaining chip. Control oil revenue, and you influence everything else. That is why oil sits at the center of this operation. The most important takeaway is not who you support politically. The real question is this: if a state can be controlled without occupation through revenue, compliance, and choke points, then sovereignty no longer ends at borders. It ends at access. That model does not belong to one country. It does not apply to one region. And it does not stop with oil. Once a system proves effective, it becomes repeatable. That is why this story matters beyond Venezuela. That is why timing mattered more than headlines. And that is why the world is paying attention. Thank you for watching. If this inspired you, hit subscribe, like, comment, and share. Be part of our journey. Beyond identities, beyond borders, beyond divisions, our destiny is one. You are watching Next Horizon Global.